All right, welcome everybody to this film review roundtable discussion about Captain Marvel. Today I have two extremely talented and insightful critics with me. We have Odin from Odin's Movie Blog and Robot Head from the Robot Head YouTube channel. How you guys doing today?
Good, great. And welcome to everyone, whether it's morning or evening or night, whenever you're watching this.
Yes, Robot Head is halfway around the world at the moment.
Yes.
He's in the upside down, as
Yes.
me and my
Yes.
friends from halfway across the world like to say all the time.
Yeah, we like it down here.
Yes.
We're away from all the trouble and the craziness.
Oh, God, yes.
Yes, I'm in Las Vegas. Odin, I believe, is in New Orleans, and Robot Head is in New Zealand.
No, Australia.
Australia, sorry, my bad.
How dare you?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's offensive, man.
Offensive to people from New Zealand.
So we've got a worldwide collaboration going on here, and we've all been brought together to talk about the latest MCU release, Captain Marvel. Now, for those of you out there who haven't checked out either Robot Head or Odin's Movie Blog's YouTube channels yet, you should definitely go there and subscribe. But they both released very in-depth and interesting takes on Captain Marvel. And the purpose of this roundtable discussion is really to just kind of sit down and analyze the film from an most objective as possible, critical standpoint, and look at it, in isolation, not as part of the overall MCU, but just as a film on its own, see how it stands on its own merit, and really kind of break it down and, analyze some of the issues with it. So let's just hop right in here. And I think one of the most interesting things about this movie is that universally, like across the board, whether you're a Marvel fanboy or, you're just kind of a casual moviegoer, the consensus around this movie has been that it's just kind of meh. It's kind of very middle of the road. It's not fantastic, but it's not so bad that, people are going to riot in the theaters or whatever. It's just kind of very mediocre. And I kind of put it on the entertainment level of something like a Doctor Strange or an Ant-Man and the Wasp, where, it's not so bad that, you can't watch it, but it's also not very good. It's just kind of something that you spend 2 hours in the theater watching, and by the time you leave, you've forgotten all about it. So what do you guys think about that? Odin in particular, do you think that this is kind of a sign of things to come in terms of Marvel films where the movies are just very mediocre, or do you think that this was just kind of a typical origin story that didn't have much to kind of launch it?
It really is hard to say, because you have on one side Kevin Feige, who's come out to try and say that this is the direction they want to go in. This is the future of the MCU. And with them recently announcing that this is indeed, with Endgame, going to be the end, not just of Phase 3, but of this so-called Infinity Saga. What it tells us is that, okay, that saga therefore includes what? It includes 22 films in 11 years or so, which means very clearly that what we're going to have going on here is a situation where they now have to rebuild. They now have to create a new saga. And the mindset is that Captain Marvel is going to be the beginning of that new saga. And if this is the beginning of the new saga, if this is the origin story that's going to get everything else going, it makes me really worried and concerned, because if this is indeed the direction they want to go, which they seem to be indicating, it makes me wonder, okay, so when they introduce any other new characters, are we going to get something similar? Are they going to try and put some type of narrative over actually creating a good story? Are they going to try and focus more so on these indie directors continuously making these movies? Because, yeah, sometimes it works. The Russo brothers, they started off kind of in the indies, were not really well known for much, and were able to do incredible work with Captain America, and now, of course, have done Infinity War and pretty soon to be Endgame. But I would not say that the directors for Captain Marvel could be put in the same boat, because one of the worst things about Captain Marvel was the writing itself, was the direction itself. I actually put less on Brie Larson and more on them because of that very fact. And so basically that question that we need to ask is Kevin Feige going to try and continue to go down this path? And if so, then what we are looking at is a mediocre universe, because we have people like Robert Downey Jr. leaving, most likely. Many others have been speculated to be leaving, and they're having to be replaced with other stars. And I made this point in one of my videos. If you're going to tell me that Brie Larson is meant to replace Robert Downey Jr., oh my God,
Good luck with
How in
that.
how in the hell are you going to pull that one off?
So
I didn't know how much to blame her or to blame the directors. I had to look them up to see what else they'd done, which I hadn't seen anything else they'd done.
yeah, they
But it
haven't
just
done
seemed
much. They've done like a couple of independent films, like about baseball and relationships and stuff.
you see this where it's like a director, they haven't got the confidence to direct the actors, tell them if they're doing a bad job, if it's boring. And yeah, like I think Brie Larson was terrible in this, but I don't know how much to blame her or how much she just got away with because the directors didn't have the balls to tell her what to do.
Well, you know what's interesting about Brie Larson is like, well, she is an Oscar-winning actress, and if you watched, Room, the movie that she won the Oscar for, she's very good at doing like the emotional stuff, like the crying and the "oh, I love you, little boy, my son," stuff like that. But when it comes to kind of the, I guess, more cocky, flippant, super soldier, superhero stuff, she came off as very flat. And, in fact, I saw on Twitter some people defending this by saying, the entire movie she's being told to suppress her emotions. And yet at the same time, she's, throwing out one-liners and, she's kind of like, she's got this kind of rapport with Nick Fury and stuff like that, where she doesn't really seem to be suppressing her emotions. And yet, that's kind of like the excuse that they're giving, is that as a character, she has to be very reserved and cold and stuff. And I feel like if they went too far in that direction, she would have been completely unlikable. And yet by making her a little bit more likable, they kind of undermined her character. So Robot Head, what do you think about that exactly in terms of like how they handled, the balance of this character?
Well, I know if I've ever said to someone, calm down, you're being too emotional, it doesn't go well. So it was amazing that she just reacted that way and just decided to get rid of any personality whatsoever because people have been telling her to control herself. I thought it was a very confused message through the whole film. It was, it was just very, well, she didn't grow through the whole film. There was no learning through the whole film. She just had to remember that she was amazing beforehand and she's still amazing. So this flatness of her character, I just think it was them trying to show power, but it showed nothing. It just showed a flatness, and it was very hard to like her.
Yeah, and I think that one of the other things that you can really add to that is that the number one argument that people said was, oh, well, when, Robert Downey Jr. or Chris Evans or any of these other guys, whenever they act stoic and emotionless, you don't talk about them. And the difference is that it's not just that she's being stoic. It's not just that she's not showing certain emotions. It's that there's no life. Because even when people like Robert Downey Jr. are showing, that stoic anger, that kind of shut down, there is so much life in and behind the eyes of his character because he is a very talented actor. And, getting back just to that point about, whether it was the writing or whether it was a direction or the acting, as Matthew, as you mentioned, she was brilliant in Room. And not only that, but she's been brilliant in other films too. There's a great short film that she did called, or not short film, but an independent film called Short Term 12. And she's fantastic in that movie. And so it's not that she doesn't have the acting chops. It's the fact that she had directors who obviously did not have a lot of experience. And not only that, but also were, she dealing with like 6 or 7 different writers when you take into account screenplay, story. And so you have all of these different moods, all of these different desires, and all of these different mindsets behind her character, I feel like pulling her in these different directions. And then on top of that, you have 2 directors who obviously don't know how to handle this type of big budget film at this level. And it's a recipe for chaos. And so that's why, like, after I saw the actual movie itself, I said, you know what? I put less blame on Brie Larson now because I already knew she is a good actor. I know that she can perform. This to me spells, okay, she was given terrible writing and was even more so given terrible, if non-existent direction on top of that.
But I think of bad casting more. Like, no matter how much you can act, you have to have comedy timing and you have to have a presence and charisma. And I didn't see any of that. Like, she didn't tick any box for me. She didn't bring anything to the table. And even if you've got a bad director, some actors go off in the completely wrong direction.
Oh, for sure.
Because they have a bad director, which is, you see what they're trying to do. I didn't see her trying to do anything in virtually every scene. It was like she just had no idea how to play this type of character, which I just think she was the bad choice from the beginning.
Oh, and I think that most people would agree that she was not the perfect choice for the part. And I think that there are better actresses for that. But I think that when you take into account the weak writing, weak direction, a stronger actor would have been able to take that and would have done wonders with it. She, not being nearly as strong in those categories, could not. I guess my main point is that had she been given, like, for example, let's say the Russo brothers, or let's say even Joss Whedon, were put in charge of her character, I think that she would have been a much more accepted character, to be perfectly honest. I really do.
Well, it is interesting because if you look at something like Kong Skull Island, for instance, where she was in, like, her performance in that was very similar to her performance in Captain Marvel, in the sense that there wasn't much there. Like, she was just on screen to look pretty and, say some funny lines and stuff like that. And then when you compare that to more of her indie stuff, like, her indie stuff is actually, like, quite good. So, and you have to wonder, like, how much of that is the directors pulling out a performance from her, how much of that is material, and how much of that is just like Brie Larson in terms of her skill level, because she did win an Academy Award, so she's got to have, like, some measure of talent, which she's proven on different occasions. But at the same time, she's also got lots of examples of her just missing the mark completely when it comes to big budget spectacle films.
True. I will say just one point about the Academy Awards. So does Patricia Arquette, and I would not say that she is a talented actor.
Yeah, there's a few people who've got them at home that maybe shouldn't have.
Very true. All right, so let's talk about the actual story about Captain Marvel. So obviously Captain Marvel has numerous issues with its actual story. So what I wanted to do is get each of your opinions about what the biggest story flaw in Captain Marvel is, why that is, and how it could have been fixed or avoided. So Odin, let's start with you.
So I would say that the biggest story problems that I have with it would have to be the fact that they try and shoehorn in so many references to make her relevant. And by doing so, they end up breaking canon, changing canon. There really hasn't been a lot of clarification made on whether something was changed or just broken. It's easy to go to those elements of the Nick Fury eye scratch scene, where all of a sudden you go back to that time in a previous film where he said, I trusted somebody and my trust was betrayed. And then you think to yourself, okay, so either he was lying during that very emotional scene at that time when he was being very serious, trying to cover the fact that it was actually a cat, or the person that he was talking about was the cat. And then you think to yourself, okay, so basically this line was put in there just to play for laughs. They took something that was so iconic about Nick Fury and decided to turn it into a joke. And I think that's what you see happen a lot in the movie. They take some major plot elements from previous films and then try and play it for laughs, and they do it very poorly on top of that. And then if they're not playing it for laughs, then they add in certain story elements, like, for example, bringing the Tesseract in. Why in the hell did that have to be brought in the first place? And they try and shoehorn that in so that way, oh, now everyone, all the normies, all the popcorn fans are like, oh, wait, I recognize this. This is the Cosmic Cube, the Tesseract, everything else. And so they use these story elements, and I think it's lazy. I think it's lazy story writing. And that's, I think, the biggest issue is that this film was just so lazily written because they shoehorned in lines, shoehorned in major, elements, various items like the Cosmic Cube, just to try and make her feel relevant to the story. When in reality, if you were to go see this film, step back, rewatch Infinity War again, and then say, Endgame, all right, that's next, you would seriously not miss anything. Captain Marvel added nothing. It added absolutely nothing to the story. And anything they do in Endgame, they could have done in Endgame anyway without this solo film. So basically the story elements, and the reason why the story elements are so weak is because it's shoehorned in. They retcon or break the overall canon of the story, or any one of the other variety of reasons. It's just, again, there really isn't one single story element, I would say, but the cat scratch for me, just every time I think about it, it makes me so angry because it was literally a point they used to try and get laughs, and it fails miserably.
So you feel like the attempt to tie Captain Marvel in with the rest of the MCU was its biggest weakness?
Shoehorned in, absolutely. It's so shoehorned in, and you watch that film and you're like, why did this film need to happen? Oh wait, that's right, it did not. At least not at this point.
The timing of it, to bring in someone now, like Endgame and Infinity War, it's really just one film cut in half, or one, the completion, and to slot this in between and have her turn up in Endgame, and we don't know, but if she saves the day, that's ripping everyone off. Like, even I could see everyone having a problem with that. Like, it just seems so, like you're saying, shoehorned in. The whole film feels like that to me. It feels like they just wanted to get this type of character in. They wanted to virtue signal as much as they could, and they just pushed this film in. It just, the whole thing, it's lazy and forced and just bad timing as well.
Well, what do you think, Robot Head, is the biggest story issue with the movie?
I'd agree with Odin. I was thinking the same thing, just the laziness, and it's forgettable, and it's just, she doesn't learn anything through it. There's no, for an origin story, there's nothing to it. We know her origin before she does, which is a mistake. We don't grow with her. She doesn't really learn anything. She just remembers things. And she finishes wonderful, and she started wonderful, and nothing happens to her in between. It's just so forgettable. Like, I'm even now recording this, I'm having trouble remembering the whole film. So I'm relying on you guys to remind me. But it is just so forgettable and so lazy. Like, when we look at these films, people forget. Like, we love to, mention that everyone loves Aliens and, Terminator and these films that had strong women. But those films were such events, and like, you can just jump through those films every 10 minutes. There's a famous scene or something people remember, or a line. And this film has nothing. I don't think anything was exciting. I don't think anything will stick in anyone's mind. It was just really forgettable. But I think the biggest problem is just, I would have to agree with Owen, the shoehorning in of everything, and just the laziness of the writing, just how lazy everything was.
But it also sounds like your biggest issue was a lack of a character arc for her. Like, she didn't go through any type of character transformation throughout the course of the movie, and thus it was kind of like, stale.
Pointless, yep.
Yeah, and you can forgive a film if sort of like all the action's good, and or you can forgive a film if a low budget film, the action might be so great or how it's made, but the story's fantastic. This didn't have either. It wasn't sort of a spectacle that was like you could just sit there and turn your brain off, and it wasn't an interesting story to follow. It was completely boring.
Yeah, and also too, when you think about the two biggest things that people defend, because it's interesting how the critics were very clearly not really loving this movie. I mean, even they in their reviews were writing how they were trying to find scrap any positive thing they could say, and they always agreed on two elements. The first of which was the performance from Samuel L. Jackson, which when you go to it, you're like, oh, it's a good performance, but they totally destroy his character. And so you think to yourself, okay, was his performance really worth them destroying his character in that way? For starters. And then the second thing they talk about is, but the relationship between, was it Monica Rambeau and, Captain Marvel and Carol Danvers, that's the heart of the film. And then every time you see those two on screen, they look like strangers. Like, even when they knew each other, they looked like strangers. It looks like two actors playing a part on screen, and you're like, this is supposed to be the chemistry that you were talking about?
There was no chemistry there between
No, not at all. And so
when they're walking along at the airport, it's just like two work colleagues that hardly know each other.
Seriously, absolutely. And higher, further, faster, baby. That's the line, and that's how I was told to say it. I mean, like, that's how it reads. And so you look at this and you're like, okay, so these are the two best things that every critic and all of the, people in the media said were great. And if even those two best things fall flat, what does that say about the rest of the movie?
Well, what I found really interesting is that, so you have two different types of main characters in these big superhero movies. You have the hero's journey characters, where they start off, as normal people, and they eventually kind of grow into the hero and learn about their powers. And then you have like the static hero, in the sense that he's always been a hero. They don't change over the course. And in fact, the the real obstacle there is that maybe the villain or the circumstances are trying to get them to change and compromise who they are, and their journey is to remain true to themselves. So you have characters like Captain America, who is static in that sense, and as well as Superman, where they have a very strong moral center, and they're fighting against forces that try to get them to compromise, and they refuse to compromise. And in that sense, they never change. But they're strong in the sense that they refuse to change in the face of very good reasons to make that change. And that was the basis of Civil War, and that was the basis of Winter Soldier and all that stuff, where Captain America just refused to give up on his friends and refused to give up on his ideals. And I feel like one of the biggest problems with Captain Marvel is that you have this story, which is basically a search for identity plot, where you have some main character who can't remember who they are, and they're on a journey to find out who they are. And when you don't know who you are as a character, it's very hard to, one, transform, but number two, also stay true to who you are. So I feel like Captain Marvel, just in the choice of what they decided to do with her character, was in a very bad position, because she couldn't really, remain, who she was, but she also couldn't transform into what she needed to be. So she was kind of stuck in between those two concepts. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, and also like the two concepts that she was stuck between was, okay, I'm really strong, and then, oh my gosh, I'm unbelievably strong. So it's like, okay, that's quite an arc you have going on there.
She was also unbelievably good too. She was the best friend. She was the best auntie to that little girl. Well, friend auntie. She was the best at everything. She was a fantastic pilot. So yeah, even if she went backwards, it was back to being really good.
She is essentially the very definition of a Mary Sue character. And some people say, oh, but she's not, because she does fall down. Remember all the flashbacks of her falling down and standing back up. And it's like, yeah, but that not during her actual character arc on screen, where she again is all powerful, still, winning. And then all of a sudden you have this chip that goes off, and then she goes Super Saiyan. And it's like, okay, so she was already crazy strong beforehand, and now she's the strongest in the universe, and we're supposed to buy that in 30 days before Endgame? Okay, got it. Perfect.
That kind of brings us to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was that, anymore Hollywood seems to believe that in order to make a quote-unquote strong female character, the female character has to be completely flawless and perfect. However, flawed characters are always the more interesting type of characters. But in this film, Captain Marvel is obviously so powerful that she has no actual flaws or weaknesses. So, Robot Head, how should this have been addressed by the filmmakers? And could Captain Marvel have been developed around flaws and weaknesses to make her more interesting to the audience?
Well, she definitely could have. And she definitely should have. And even like being an origin story, there should be a lot of growth, just because it is the origin story. So, but even if they just wanted to keep it simple, when she found out, I suppose we're talking about spoilers in this, doesn't matter what we mention, but even when she found the big twist in the film, which was handled terribly, but she finds out that the Skrull are the good guys, there was like no remorse that she spent years fighting them, no questioning whether that was the right thing to do, didn't feel bad for the multiple ones she'd killed. Like, even if we'd had a little scene there where she had some regrets. But no, that was all fine. Everything she did was fine. It could have made her so much more relatable. And when she gets her powers, like, there should have been some learning curve there as well. But just everything is so flat, And even if it's a minor change, like, again, if we go back to Aliens and we're talking about Vasquez. Vasquez, am I saying that right? The other woman in Aliens? Yeah.
Female Marine,
yeah, like she starts strong in that film. It's not an origin story, but she's so strong in that film. She's a professional. She's a professional at what she does. And by the end, she's softened to sort of care about the strangers that have joined them and trying to protect them. You wouldn't call it a massive arc, but she's a fantastic character that everyone loves. But yeah, Captain Marvel, like, at least have some remorse for what you've done, have some learning curve, anything. Even the other one too is the family. Like, they just throw away that she doesn't get along with her family. Well, there must be some issues there. If you go through all this, come back, and you just go see her best friend, there's obviously some problems in your past you could deal with. But no, we'll just ignore everything. She's perfect. Yes. Just stay that way.
Yeah, and that the reason why is because they were going to go with a daddy's issue story arc, most likely, and they were like, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that now. It's 2019. We can't have that be the issue.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's
because
just, it's
all
just,
the problems have to be someone stopping her from proceeding, like getting better. There's sort of no. She doesn't have to learn anything. She just has to stop people stopping her.
Yeah, and you make actually a really good point about the learning curve with the powers, because even when she has the little inhibitor chip on, she has to learn how to control her powers. And yet when the inhibitor chip is off, all of a sudden she knows exactly how to use the fullness of her powers. Like, that just doesn't make any damn sense. Like, seriously, she gets her powers and then all of a sudden she can fly around and fly through spaceships and destroy Ronan, not to mention destroy one of the coolest villains in the MCU. At least he was one of the coolest villains until he was totally emasculated. And that's what the entire film essentially is Captain Marvel trying to emasculate every other male character on screen. Like,
just
think about
remind
it.
me, that chip, did she know about that the whole time? Like, to me, looking back, she just, like, it just all of a sudden, okay, I'll just pull this off and see what happens. Like, it was like she'd never question it. But am I right about that?
Well, in the beginning, they did set up that ship was kind of keeping her from using the full extent of her powers. Like when she had that first psychic meeting with the supreme leader or whatever, the Kree
But does
AI
she
was.
just go along with that? Like, doesn't she
Yeah.
never sort of questions that, does she?
So basically, like, what she's been told is that, because obviously she has the amnesia angle, which is always a fun angle to write into a story. Oh, I have amnesia. I can't remember. I'm
That's
only
not a
getting
shortcut at all.
I know, not at all, right? And so it's interesting is because they basically present it as she has all of these powers, but she can't control them. And so the inhibitor chip is there to help her control her powers. That's the reason why it's there. And so she accepts that, exactly, because she's got amnesia. And so she just says, oh yeah, that makes sense. I have these photon blasts that come out of my hands. I guess I can't control them. Sure, why not?
But just looking at it from a writer's perspective, you have this character who is of incredible power, and the Kree race basically recognizes that she's super powerful, and so they try to co-opt her for their own purposes. And at the end of the movie, when Ronan is basically facing her down, he says, we'll come back for the weapon, and he's referring to Captain Marvel. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you guys already had the weapon, and you chose not to unleash her. You could have like really brainwashed her to make her this like WMD basically, and instead you inhibit her powers and you make it so that she can just pull that thing out without it killing her. You would think that they would have some type of self-destruction mechanism in place to, if they lost control of her, like they'd somehow be able to kill her. But none of that. I mean, like, as a writer, I sit down and I think, okay, this is stuff I need to address when crafting this story, and yet they seem to completely ignore that type of thing.
Well, that's because they cared more about trying to get the immigration storyline angle going with the Kree versus the Skrulls, and say the Skrulls are refugees running away from the oppressive Kree regime. And they cared more about that than about actually having it make any sense.
When they all appear towards the end and they're coming out of the darkness and that, I was laughing in the cinema. It was just like so on the nose. It was so just, student film writing. It just was, very lazy.
Yep.
So let's talk about the big central plot twist in the film. And, spoiler alert, it was revealed that the bad guys of the Kree were not actually the villains. So basically the Skrulls were kind of set up for the first half of the movie to be the bad guys. And then it was revealed that, oh no, the Skrull are actually the good guys and the Kree are the bad guys. How do you feel this plot twist was handled, and did it help or hurt the film to have this twist be such an integral part of the story? Odin, let's start with you. Horribly
done. Oh my gosh. Like, basically, I'm thinking back on this, and I remember Scott Mendelsohn was playing such a great villain, and I believed him as the villain, and he was a villain. And then out of nowhere, out of left field, all of a sudden he has a family and he's a good guy and he hasn't been trying to destroy people and things the entire movie and everything's fine. And it's like, wait, what? Like, it took me a second where I'm like, wait, hold on. Are you trying to tell me this whole time, while these guys have been the bad guys, villains, destroying property, everything like that, that they've actually been the good guys and they're simply just victims of circumstance? It was so bad. And talking about these shoehorned in characters and shoehorned in storyline, that also to me was something that they obviously rushed through and said, "Oh, here's a fun little twist. We got a lot of things going on, and currently in our country, in our world, of various creatures from different places not getting along. How about we do this giant twist where we say that the Kree have been the bad guys all along, and instead we have the Skrulls being the poor innocent victims, even though they've just destroyed so many things and have been the bad guys the entire time." It was just, it was poorly done. I hated it.
How do
When
you
they
feel
did
they
that-
handled it, Robot?
Well, I was sitting there and it sort of made me think that I'd gotten the first half of the film wrong, because I was thinking, weren't they trying to kill her from the very beginning? like there was no sense that they were trying to capture her or talk to her. It was just they were trying to kill her. So yeah, I found it a very confusing twist. And I have heard from other people, because I don't know the comics and the sort of backstory, that they're a very interesting enemy to have in the stories, because they can shapeshift and change, and it's, there's fantastic stories. And I've heard people say they thought they would become the new enemy of the whole MCU. So it just seems like such a bad decision to make them the good guys just for one twist in this one film, when then it just wipes out what they can do for the rest of the films.
I actually want to touch on that theory that you brought up, but before I get to that, me personally, when I was watching the film, I felt like the movie had this plot twist in mind, like they were going to make the Skrulls the good guys, and the entire movie felt structured around that plot twist as opposed to being structured around the character of Captain Marvel. Which, when you're writing a film and you're trying to make a good film, you usually want to have the character, the main character, carry the action through the movie. And if you're going to have plot twists, you need to have the plot twist kind of be congruent with this character's journey. And it felt like, with Captain Marvel, the big plot twist was what the storytellers were kind of building up to, and everything was kind of, ancillary to that. So basically the character was in the service of the plot as opposed to the plot being in service of the character. I feel like that was the thing that really didn't make that plot twist ring true for me, was because, it was kind of clever. You didn't see it coming. But at the same time, it felt very forced, and it felt like it cheapened the journey of the character.
Well, I think that adds to it, that what we were saying about the lazy storytelling. I think that there's adds to it by the fact that they focus more so on telling this narrative. And as I said, this movie has been from the beginning all about narrative. And whether you look outside the film, what the actors have said, what the actual film itself says, it's all about a narrative and not about a character. And that's why the film is.
I actually think there's a reason for that, though. And, Robot had kind of touched on it when he was talking about what he had heard before. And that is that I think Kevin Feige and the people at Marvel Studios have a plan for the next phase, post Thanos, in the sense that they're going to have like a new like team up threat looming that gives them a reason to bring all their heroes together for these team up films. And I do think that that's going to have to do with the Kree-Skrull War. And so I think that they knew going into Captain Marvel that all the comic book fans are going to be familiar with the fact that the Skrulls are the bad guys and the Krees are usually the good guys, or they're varying forms of bad guys. And so I think what they wanted to do is kind of, pull a Ryan Johnson, subvert our expectations by saying the Skrulls are actually the good guys. And then it's going to be revealed, oh, the Skrulls aren't so good after all. And they're going to lead into a secret invasion storyline for the Phase 4. And I think that's a big reason why they have been saying that Captain Marvel is going to be the center of the MCU going forward, in the sense that her movie was going to launch this new conflict that is good, that all the other movies are kind of going to center around.
Yeah, I guess. But to me, if they end up going with the secret invasion, which is one I think would make a perfect next phase, to be honest, I think that they went about it the wrong way. I think that they cheapened the Skrulls by doing this. I think that not only that they're going to have confused a lot of people if they decide to switch it. Like, oh, we got you this time. Oh, we switched it again. Oh, we got a double switch going on. We got a double whammy. We got you both times. And I don't think a lot of fans are really going to appreciate that. I think they're going to be like, wait a minute. Now I'm confused. If they're not confused already.
Yeah. Robot Head, what do you think going forward? Do you think that they're leading up to using the Kree-Skrull War as the big central conflict of the MCU, or do you think that they're going to go in a different direction?
I wouldn't really know. Again, like the history of sort of these characters, I don't know that much about. But just by going from the films, I wouldn't have a clue what they're going to do after Endgame. I mean, I can see they're building up Captain Marvel, but it's such a flat build-up that it doesn't sort of give me any idea in what direction they're going to head. This film just brought up more fears that they're going to now start making more and more mistakes. So story-wise, yeah, I don't really have any idea, which direction they'll go. But I think they're going to they're just going to, it feels like they're going to this formula filmmaking that's going to be very boring, tick the boxes, and still make the money.
Well, what's interesting about that is that you have like Thor 2, Captain America, the First Avenger, and Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3 in a very similar situation to Captain Marvel, where those movies weren't great movies. They were just kind of like meh, especially the Thor movies. But in terms of like the origin stories, the first Iron Man was really the only thing that seemed to get it right. And even then, there were some problems in the third act of that film. So Marvel kind of has this history of kind of dropping the ball when it comes to introducing the characters, but then on their follow-up movies, they tend to kind of correct their mistakes, like the Captain America Winter Soldier and Civil War and stuff like that. Those movies were phenomenal, in my opinion. And Thor 3, you saw some course correction there with Ragnarok. And so I think that, there's this pattern at play with Marvel Studios in the sense that they don't always do their best work in terms of doing the origin story or launching a character. But once that character's out there and they have time to kind of resonate with people and stuff like that, they figure out what works for that character and then take them in that direction. Do you guys think that we could be seeing something very similar with Captain Marvel in the sense that after Endgame, Marvel is kind of going to know how the audience responds to her and then course correct? Or do you think they're just going to keep her as she is and keep pushing her down our throats?
So as far as this is concerned, I think I have two different thoughts on it, because obviously I've seen what Kevin Feige has done over the past, 8 or 9 years since Disney actually took over. And I'm looking at all the things that he's doing, and I'm looking at all the things that he's done, and he's made a lot of really smart decisions, and he's picked the right people to run these projects. He's picked the right people to write the projects. And for the most part, most of the films have been good. There's really only been a few that money would, universally say were duds or were not very good films and did not have good stories. So what I'm hoping is that Captain Marvel, with this film, they don't let the $1 billion that it's going to end up making at the box office confuse themselves to think, oh, this was a good movie, we need to make more movies like this. And I'm hoping that instead Kevin Feige goes back and says, okay, we've introduced a character, we've finished off the Infinity Saga with Endgame. All right, now let's try and rebuild. Now let's try and do something a little bit better. Because if you put Brie Larson in better hands, more capable hands, writing and directing wise, I think there is a potential for a good story. Do I think that's what's going to happen? No, because I just don't have faith in the current system. I really just, especially after all the coverage that we saw happen with this movie, especially with everything that's been going on over in Disney with Star Wars, and now it seems going on with Marvel. Marvel Comics, I think, is a better example of that, because it's almost like a microcosm of what's about to happen with the MCU. And if the MCU follows the same pathway that Marvel Comics does, we're looking at a not only very poorly done stories, but also very much agenda-driven stories. And that might make money for a little while, but over time, fans are going to walk away, and it's not going to end up good for them.
I think it's less likely they'll admit that they're doing anything wrong. And as long as they're making that money, I think they'll keep heading in the same direction. I think what happened with Star Wars and Last Jedi and then Solo losing money, I think that was a huge wake-up call for them, that's not going to happen again, not by changing what they're doing, but changing how they handle it.
Well, I think, pretty much Marvel feels like they're bulletproof in general, because their movies always do really well. And even though there was some controversy surrounding, Captain Marvel, it didn't seem to really affect the box office, and it probably won't affect Endgame going forward. But I think that Marvel, in terms of course correcting with their characters, they tend to look at, okay, how do people really feel about this movie? Because the Thor movies were very mundane up until Ragnarok, where they kind of said, Chris Hemsworth is naturally very funny and very charismatic. Why don't we take Thor in a slightly more crazy, fun direction than he's been in the past? And so like that Thor Ragnarok kind of rebooted that character into something that was way better than his previous incarnation. And you also saw the same thing with Captain America, where Captain America Winter Soldier kind of took the Cap character and made him more of like a political thriller movie, as opposed to like a patriotic Captain America type thing. So you constantly see Marvel kind of getting a read on how people are reacting to their characters and then adjusting them to fit that mold. And I'm really curious as to how they're going to do that with Captain Marvel, if they're going to keep her as she is, or if they're going to, maybe try to tap into the strengths that Brie Larson has in terms of being like, the emotional actress and, have kind of coming from a more independent background where she's better at these smaller, more emotional moments as opposed to the bigger, larger than life hero stuff. And I think that the big thing that they would do is maybe introduce some type of like weakness to the character, something that she has to overcome, like her version of kryptonite. Because let's face it, by the end of that movie, she was unstoppable. Like there was literally nothing about her that could be considered a weakness. And so you have kind of an issue there where it was the same issue with the Luke Cage Marvel series, in the sense that indestructible characters are boring. So you have to give them some type of weakness in order to make them interesting. What do you guys think would be the big weakness for Captain Marvel, Robot?
Oh, I think that's the biggest problem is, where do we go from here? They've done a Rey like they did in sorry, I keep going back to Star Wars, but it's like a Rey situation. Like, where do they go with her to let us have some interest if they don't bring in some kryptonite or something to weaken her? Because she's just too fully formed, too powerful. There's, like you looked at the original Iron Man, and at the end, he sort of just is admitting who he is. He's changed, and now he's going to move forward as a hero. There's so much to go with. Cool suit. He's got all the power and the money. There's so much to work on. Captain America, he's changed from the sort of the weakling to the strong guy, and then they were just using him as a symbol, and then he became, an actual hero. And again, you could just see so many stories coming from that. But with her, I think that is the biggest problem, is why do you want to go see her again? What are they going to do? And then if they just bring in something that just weakens her, again, it just seems so lazy. I think they've created a real problem for themselves by starting with the fact of sort of having that she's a strong woman. People just kept her down. Well, now no one's keeping her down. What's going to happen with her? And I'm sure there's great writers out there that can think of a million great stories that would be good, but I don't know if they'll actually do it.
Yeah, and I think that you made a good point about Captain America, because even Captain America, when he finally gets all that strength, guess what he realizes very quickly? He cannot save everyone. He sees loss. He sees that there is a limit to what he can do, and one of the reasons
Superman
why,
sort of feeling that.
Yeah, I mean, and also you see it even happen more so by the fact that the Russos, when they took over his character, just really wanted to create the fact that, he is a flawed, imperfect person despite all the strength that he has. And the Russos have gone on record, and this is the reason why, at least when it comes to Endgame, I have a lot of faith in how they're going to present Captain Marvel, is because the Russos have gone on record saying that they recognize how OP Captain Marvel has been in the comics and how she would be portrayed in the movie, and that they recognize that that is boring. That having a character with no weaknesses is a boring thing. And so they say they have found a very creative and fun way to be able to handle that. And so until they make a bad movie, I will trust the Russos, because they haven't let me down yet. And so obviously they could be, we could have egg on their face at the end of this movie, and I could be like, oh man, Russos, what in the hell did you do? But until that happens, I will have faith and trust in them. The one thing I can think of, though, as far as ways to weaken her, there's the one that's fun and fantasy booked that's not going to happen, at least not in this movie. And that is, of course, the Rogue comes in and takes her powers, which would be amazing. That'd be hilarious. But obviously that's not going to happen because the Fox deal happened too quickly, and they're gonna wait before they bring X-Men fully into the MCU anyway. The other one I can think of, and this was something that someone else had mentioned, is that, well, since Thanos still has the Infinity Stones, cannot Thanos do something with one of them to take away her powers? And that, to me, could be an interesting storyline, is all of a sudden this overpowered person comes in, and then just very quickly he does kind of another snap, only this time it's not to snap someone out of existence, but rather to drain her of all the powers that she may have had. And that at least could, make sense of it. Is it the best thing? Are there better stories? Probably, because then also eventually it means that she's going to get her powers back. But I'm not going to lie, I would not mind having that movie end with her having no powers at all and just being a normal person, because if she's just going to be the OP person that saves the day and is the new OP leader, God, please save us.
Well, what's interesting about Marvel characters in particular is that they're all very kind of human, vulnerable characters. Like, Iron Man, Tony Stark is just a very smart dude. And in fact, they set up this thing where the very battery that, powers the Iron Man thing is the only thing that's keeping him from dying. So you have a character with serious flaws and drawbacks with Tony Stark, and the same thing with Captain America, where he's not bulletproof. He can be killed. Black Widow, Black Panther, all these characters, Spider-Man, they're very vulnerable characters. I think pretty much only Hulk and Thor are the ones that are arguably, kind of godlike in terms of like their unstoppability. But even Thor gets messed up like really badly, especially in Ragnarok. And Hulk, his initial weakness, even though when he's in the form of Hulk, he's pretty much unstoppable. He's got the Bruce Banner side to him. So he has this vulnerability. And in a way, the fact that Hulk's not able to kind of control himself is another kind of big drawback to his powers. But when you have a character like Captain Marvel, you literally have no weaknesses to her. There's nothing out there that can kind of rein in her powers other than that chip that was just
and also it basically ties you into a box, because the only thing that you can then do is this: you can either, one, bring in someone more powerful, or two, find a way for her to lose her powers. Like, those are the only two options that they've seemed to give at this point, is either there's something that makes her lose her powers or there's something more powerful. And that is just such a small box to put a character in. And that's why it's dead on arrival after one movie,
like she's a pilot. That's about all she's she's good at. So if they take her powers away, how does that affect the character? Because
God knows it's not her charm and winning personality that's gonna win people over.
Yeah,
that's why it feels like such a sort of a trip up. Like, I'm sure the money will make them feel better about it that they're making, but I just can't understand why they chose to bring this character in now, because it just seems to bring problems. Like, they could have easily finished up without it. I know they want to sort of set up the next set of movies and the next set of heroes, but it just seemed to bring her in so powerful right now, right towards the end, and virtually wipe out what all the other characters have done. Well,
my theory on that is that Marvel is looking to go into the more cosmic realm for the next phase of their universe. And so Captain Marvel is this kind of bridge between the Earth and the cosmic realm, because you also have Guardians of the Galaxy, but now you're going to have the Immortals, and you're going to be bringing in the Fantastic Four and stuff like that. So I think she was kind of, in Kevin Feige's mind at least, the one to lay the groundwork for, setting the stage for, the bigger cosmic kind of battles that they're going to be moving towards, like away from Earth and towards that stuff. That's just my theory. What do you guys think?
Is it true she signed up for 7 films or something like that?
Yes.
But so they're not going to kill her at any stage.
Oh, they might have her come back. They come back.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they just did kill a few of them off, didn't they? So I suppose
that includes crossovers. So, for instance, one of those 7 films is going to be Endgame.
Yeah,
and if she shows up in another person's movie, that goes towards the contract and stuff. So, she's not going to have 7 standalone Captain Marvel films. She might have 3, but then she'll show up and.
Just you wait, Matt. Just you wait. You say that, and they're going to be like, "Oh, challenge accepted. We're going to release a Captain Marvel film every year for the next 7 years."
Well, that'll give us something to talk about.
If they thought, if they want the media to continue to praise this movie, that's how you do it.
Well, talking about media praise and stuff like that. So there's been a lot of kind of controversy about the quote unquote feminist message in this film. And, overcoming gender biases is typically like a really big issue in female-led action movies. So you got films like G.I. Jane, Erin Brockovich, Thelma and Louise, Hidden Figures, and all these narratives that center around women overcoming male-dominated institutions. And the movies I listed, I felt were very good in showcasing how like a strong female character can kind of overcome the obstacles that these institutions set up for them. How do you feel, Odin, that Captain Marvel handled this theme and its impact on its story?
It did terribly, because every movie that you just mentioned and every character that you just mentioned had a character arc, started off like towards the bottom and built their way up. That's I think the biggest problem with this movie overall is that it tried way too hard to be something that was not up to the norm. It tried too much to be something that was not what people expected it to be. In fact, one of her lines, which I think speaks to the philosophy behind this film of, I'm tired of people telling me what I'm supposed to do, or something to that effect. And I'm just thinking to myself, why does that have to be the new modern message?
It's a real victim mentality, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
Coming in as the victim constantly, like, you watch a strong character, they're not the victim, like even the way she kept falling over in that, like she's playing sport and we need to feel sorry for her because she fell over. It's just this constant victim that they want to celebrate, that you are a victim. And if we can just stop the people keeping you down, this is what you could achieve. There's no...
But also, you don't have to demonize men in the process. Like, seriously, can you name like one really good guy that was not emasculated in this film? You can't. Like every male
like
that you can
whole
think
population, it's like Thelma and Louise. Like, I haven't seen it for a while, but she shoots a attempted rapist, doesn't she, or a rapist? Like, she actually kills one guy that's a horrible person, but they don't make out everyone's horrible.
No, seriously, like, because think about it. Think about all the references. You have the guy on the motorcycle. How about a smile, honey? Oh God! Oh my God! No.
Well, they needed a reason to justify her stealing his motorcycle.
So let's make it about sexism. Why not? Why not make that a motivating factor about her character? The other one though that gets me though is the fact that literally again every guy she meets either is emasculated or is just some type of sexist. And the one that got me the most though was when they kept showing clips of her entering into the Air Force, and they made the stupid comment saying there's a reason they call it a cockpit. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? Who wrote that line and why is it in the movie? And so when you add all of those things and all these lines and moments together, you're like, okay, so literally all the flashbacks are telling us that she has been repressed because she is a woman her entire life. And that's what you're going to go with? I'm sorry. There's better ways to tell a story.
The scene that got me too was when the Skrull come and they're at her friend's house, Maria's house, and they appear in the house to say that we're the good guys, and that whole sort of, we get the big twist. But no one's shocked that there's aliens here. No one's shocked that they can shapeshift. Maria looks out the window. She's standing there with the child. Like, that whole scene could have been so dramatic or scary, or they're them trying to capture them to explain to them what's going on, but they just walk in, and then there's just sort of this mouthing off backwards and forwards. And does he say something about, calls her little lady or something? He says some line to Maria, and she's so offended by that. And it was like, that's more important, having this power struggle in this conversation, than actually making this scene interesting. Like, we're not going to freak out that there's a guy that looks like a demon standing in the lounge room. We're just going to, show how strong this friend is, that she's not going to be talked down to. Yeah. Crazy.
And also not just an alien looking dude, but an alien looking dude that has been trying to kill you and your family for the past hour. And then the last 35-40 minutes, I'm a good guy. I have a family too.
The best part of that scene in particular is that Ben Mendelsohn, the guy who plays the big Skrull bad guy.
Yeah.
The filmmakers didn't notice this when he did it, but he's drinking from a sippy cup, like a fast food takeout cup in that scene. Mm-hmm. And somehow he found an exact replica of the cup that Samuel L. Jackson drinks from in Pulp Fiction. And so it was kind of Ben Mendelsohn kind of doing a nod to Sam Jackson's Pulp Fiction performance when he was doing that scene.
Oh, wow.
and
again,
it was a
God,
really fun Easter egg, but
yes,
that was not from the writers. That was from the actor doing
exactly
that
right.
scene.
Some
In
of the
the
best things, aren't from the writers or the directors. It's from the individual actors who, as I said, like if you want to talk about Samuel L. Jackson, the dude gives a great performance. The de-aging makeup looks fantastic, but God, his character is just so underutilized. The fact that this dude, who is a supposed shield agent, at one point is holding a cat while the Monica Rambeau or Maria Rambeau is the one holding the gun shooting. And all that we know about her is that she flies, planes, not that she knows how to use alien technology. And yet somehow, some way, the guy in charge of Shield or running Shield or in Shield, who's supposed to be dealing with this stuff, but have apparently never experienced aliens before. Oh my God, seriously, so many problems.
Well, I guess my real question here is that, so there's obviously some feminist messaging in this movie. However, I'm wondering how much of that is just the trope of, women kind of overcoming these male-dominated institutions because that's the natural kind of obstacle that is easy to fall back on, and how much of it was specifically like men are evil, women, girl power type things, like how much of it was a story contrivance as opposed to an actual political stance. What do you think, Robot?
I think it was both. I think it was just an easy way to write the story, and it ticks that other box as well. So I think they're trying to stand out with what they're saying, but in the laziest way possible. Like, we've seen films since the 60s, since the 50s, dealing with these things. And I don't mind what they have in there, and I don't mind what message they're trying to get across if it's entertaining and it's clever and it shows it in a fun way. But it was just the laziest, easiest go-to. Some of it was pathetic, like the flashbacks especially, and this isn't for you, and I'm not. These quotes aren't correct, but this sort of just simple put down because she's a girl. Like, the struggle was so surface level. There was nothing more to it. Like, show us more about the family, why she's not dealing with them. That could have had, a lot more of a stronger statement, but it was just so on the surface. So I think it was just lazy writing.
Yeah.
Trying to pretend that they're actually saying something important. And it's something that the whole world caught on to a long time ago, and we all understand. And, we're happy to move. If you want to talk about it again, fine, but you've got to make it interesting.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that sentiment as well. And I think that you really do have this mixture. The mix is so ambiguous that I don't think they realized what they were doing half the time, or that they didn't see anything wrong with what they were doing half the time. And I just, again, I keep thinking about more moments. So you also have the other moment where all of a sudden, Carol Danvers lands in the blockbuster, and what's the first thing she does? Blow off Arnold Schwarzenegger's head.
But do you really think that was, like a kind of like anti-white male message, like toxic masculinity, or do you think that was just like a meant to be like a funny bit where she saw someone who looked like a threat and it turns out it was a standee?
The fact that it was a white male, and that the only other person next to that white male was a woman, I think that was very clearly. I personally think that was an intentional nod.
I don't feel like that was any kind of like subversive message about like,
if
man,
if it had been in isolation, if that had been the only thing, I would have said absolutely that's digging too deep. But the fact that we've got all these other things that we've been talking about, I think every single thing in there was like, how else can we try and put down the white man? Oh wait, we can do this.
And I don't even care if they do that, if it's funny and good. Like, it's just, the only thing I get offended by is, I keep repeating myself, but the laziness and just how it's just not interesting. Like, just do the same joke but make it funnier or make it better. Like, just that's the only thing that gets me. So I don't get this overly offended if it's a white guy or a male.
I feel like you've touched on something like really important here, which is this concept of lazy storytelling. There's one part of the movie that really sticks out to me in this regard, in the sense that you have the character of Maria Rambeau, whatever her name is. And basically, entering the third act, the writers are like, how do we keep this character involved with the story? And you have the scene where you have her 10-year-old daughter. I don't even know how old she is, but she's a young girl. And she's like, Mommy, why don't you go help these people fight a very dangerous alien invasion? And it's like, could you guys, if you were like a kid, could you imagine telling your parent to go off and on what could very well be a suicide mission?
But doesn't she say,
okay.
I mentioned this in my video, doesn't she say to set a good example or something like that?
Yeah, set a good
that
example.
Was ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's all
I
because
mentioned in mine, like, she's a single mum, the only provider. Go on this suicide mission because you're not setting a good enough example for me. Like, she's a professional looking after a child on her own. That was a pretty good example to begin with.
Yeah, and I think that it all really comes down to the fact, because everyone who knows the comics knows that this is the little girl is the one who was the first captain, like the first female Captain Marvel, actually, historically speaking. And likely, since this was in the 90s and Endgame is in the present day, she will probably come back in the next movie or in another series as whatever named character they're going to have for her. And I think that was a nod to the comic fans saying, look, you see, she's spunky and she's with it because she's going to have powers one day.
No, if your kid said that to you, you'd really have to question how much they love you.
Oh, yeah. I'd be like, wait, what?
I've been doing homework.
You
with
want
you
me
for
to
years.
die?
It's like, well, I got grandma and grandpa. They can look after me.
It's like, well, remember that last time when you had that, alien weapon you've never used before? You seem to be pretty proficient with it. I think that you do fine. I think that you do great. Okay, sure.
Even in that one scene, not to pick on everything that happened because we'd be here all day, but her outfit changing color, that just seemed a convenient option to build into.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Well, what about, using, Earth's telephone system to make intergalactic phone calls? That makes
Radio
sense.
Shack, yes.
Like even if she was able to kind of modify something, how would she use 1990s telephone technology to contact other people? Off
Because
planet?
she's super smart. That's why. She's the smartest. She's the fastest. She's the strongest. She's the prettiest. She is the ist of everything.
But what about they turn the plane into a spaceship?
Yeah,
in one night.
That could be, that can be excused because you had like this alien scientist doing it. So you're like, okay, whatever. Suspension of disbelief, that's okay. But have any, as a writer, you need to set up certain things about this stuff. And it's like, well, okay, so she modifies our technology to work with, alien technology. But at the same time, it's like, well, how is that supposed to work? At least give us a line of exposition to explain this type of thing. And I think it goes towards your lazy storytelling critique here, Robot, in the sense that this movie, just scene after scene after scene, is just lazy. Mm-hmm. That's its biggest problem.
Even the start, the train chase just seemed so... I'm going to keep you. I've got to think of a different word besides lazy, but just nothing memorable. It was just, just the whole way through, just ticking boxes. There was nothing at stake on that
thing. It's like she's chasing the Skrull guy, gets him on a train, and it's like, there's no ticking clock. There's no greater good at stake here. It's just like she's chasing a guy who took a shot at her. And so...
And her powers seemed to back off a bit because she didn't seem to be so strong against this one as she had been previously.
Well, one of the interesting things in terms of storytelling is that whenever you have an action scene, like the Hollywood mentality is that as long as it looks good, as long as it's got big explosions and stuff happening, it's a good action scene. But if there's no emotional investment from the audience in the action scene, what is there to actually be thrilled by? And I feel like Captain Marvel continuously in all their action scenes, there was a very big lack of stuff at stake. Even when Ronan shows up at the end and shoots 1 billion nuclear missiles at the planet, like they're all in one big cluster and she just shoots them all down. It's like, what if he had actually done that on a wider scale? How would she have been able to, take those things out in time? And it was just like, very, very convenient, and nothing was ever really at stake because you never really cared about the Skrulls. When the Kree show up at the end, they start kind of like trying to gun them down or take them prisoner or whatever. You're just like, I don't care if these people die. It's like you spent half the movie making me hate them, and then like the second half, I'm suddenly supposed to care about these characters that I've known for like 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. So I feel like Captain Marvel is just littered with this type of thing where the audience investment is very low at every stage of the story.
Very low. Like, I had no connection to whatsoever to anyone in the film, really. It just seemed all removed from me, and just couldn't have cared who died or who lived the whole way through.
And I do think that one of the film's biggest issues is in the third act, where Brie Larson kind of comes into her full powers. And I know you guys have criticized the whole men keeping her down and her standing back up, but I always, like, when I was watching the movie for the first time, I looked at that as this is her big character moment, in the sense that every time she falls, she picks herself back up again. And that's kind of the thing that they were using to show the strength of her character, even though they didn't really communicate it in a way where I think it was palatable to the entire audience. It was a good scene where, you see her through various stages in her life learning to stand up under her own strength, and not let, whatever it is that was, coming against her keep her down. But at the same time, like Odin points out, like, there's this messaging behind these moments where it's evil men who are doing this, and it can kind of come off like that, I feel. But at the same time, this is kind of the real core issue with this character, is that the thing that's supposed to be her biggest strength is kind of lost in this narrative. Don't you guys think that that's the case?
And it's so common. Like, kids fall over all the time, and you scream out, "Get up!" Like, keep going. Or, when she's on the rope and they're all chanting it, like, that would happen to the next person that got up there that couldn't do it. Like, all her problems just seem so average that, like, I didn't feel this emotional weight. It's like, yeah, I've fallen over.
But after she kind of comes into her own, like when she stands up and she gets this full care, her full power back, she's basically a walking Deus ex machina for the film, because it's just like she can't be stopped. So I guess my question to you, Robot, would be, how should the storytellers have handled her earning her powers as opposed to them just being given to her by the plot?
Yes, without rewriting the whole story, at least make it difficult or fun. Or I'm just thinking of sort of Iron Man, where he has to learn, and it also looks super fun to the audience. That, like, imagine having that suit, what you could do, or all that money, or everything he's got. Like, they should have given us some reason that we either felt for her that it was difficult, or she was amazed by her own power, or she didn't know how to use it, or it was fun. I mean, they sort of, when she does that Yoo-hoo thing flying around, just sounded ridiculous when she's trying to save everyone's lives. Never understand when they just confuse what emotion she should be going through. She's not the only film to do it. It seems to be a thing.
Try spinning. That's a good trick.
Yeah, exactly. But there was just like, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but she just was just the same person. And then here's all these powers, go for it. And like, I didn't care. Like, I didn't care that she could now fly around, just blow everything up. That's good. Okay, let's move on. There was no struggle. There was no emotional struggle or struggle with learning what to do, or even really struggle to save people around her. It all seemed very easy and very straightforward. So, yeah, the writers should have just done something in there to make us feel for her or envy her or want to be like her, but they didn't bother with any of that.
Odin, how do you think they should have handled, her learning her powers or introducing her powers?
Again, without rewriting the entire movie, it's kind of hard to really put it in. I guess for me, what it really
just bring in another actor, like,
if I had to rewrite
a whole new movie,
right?
Yeah.
If I had to, so basically, with that, essentially, what I would have done, and this goes beyond just this movie, what I would have done is I would have scrapped this movie and introduced her in Endgame under the capable hands of the Russo brothers, and then from there build a story. And then at that point, guess what you don't need? You don't need an origin story. You don't need to explain where her powers come from. You don't need to explain all this. So I feel like we're in an age now where we have way too many. Like, seriously, we've had enough origin stories. We could do without having to always have it. Like, seriously, how many times have we seen Spider-Man be told the Uncle Ben story? It's just like, stop telling with the origin stories. Just, you can have a hero in the process of being a hero.
I think it would have been better her turning up in Endgame, even though I think we don't need her at all. That I think would have worked better, because this whole film wasn't needed.
Yeah, because now what they wanted to do essentially was they wanted her to be able to exist in total isolation. They wanted her to be great on her own, and they didn't want her to have to rely on anybody. And I think that was a mistake because she is not a strong enough character, like as far as creativity wise. Like there's a reason why this comic has been rebooted 4 times since 2012. There's a reason why Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel has not succeeded in the comics, and it's because the character sucks. And if you're going to try and take a sucky character with a terrible backstory and make her like the lead in the entire future of the MCU, then guess what? You're going to have a weak MCU because of that. And so I agree. I think that they should have just had her be introduced with other people, because then she could have played off them instead of it just being, it's all about me. It's all about me. They chose the wrong female to try and push the female storyline. They already had one perfectly set up, and her name was Black Widow.
Well, I think that probably the biggest issue was the primary decision to have this be a search for identity plot, in the sense that they take away her memories and then they kind of, set her on a path to rediscover who she is. I think that really kind of hampered the character development. What I would have liked to have seen, and this is just my writer brain kind of going off in its own direction, is that you have the flashback where it's revealed how she gets her powers. She's flying this experimental, spaceship with light speed drive. It crashes. She has to destroy the light speed drive, which was powered by the Tesseract. She absorbs a bunch of this, solar energy or whatever the crap it is. And then Yongbog, I forget his name.
Yongrog,
thank you. He kind of takes her unconscious body back to the Kree homeworld and brainwashes her because she can't remember anything from the explosion. Now, what I would have liked to have seen, I think, and this would have been a lot more kind of impactful, was that maybe Nick Fury is the one who recovers her after the explosion, and all of a sudden the Kree and the Skrull are both after her because she absorbed this energy that they want, and she has to learn how to harness this energy as Fury kind of keeps her one step ahead from these two other guys. If you really think about it, this movie is very similar to The Long Kiss Goodnight in the sense that you have this amnesiac main female character who doesn't know anything, who teams up with Samuel L. Jackson to stay one step ahead of the bad guys.
No, also
he has been making films forever, hasn't he?
But I guess also too for me, and this really just goes back into, I think the comics version was just a bit better, where originally Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel. See, here's what I would have done. I would have had Miss Marvel introduced with Marvel, like with the actual Marvel, not this freaking Annette Bening version gender swap, because why not? I would have loved to have seen them together. And you can have it be where, the story is more about Carol Danvers, but at the very least, then you have an understanding, because instead of you having to bring in the Tesseract, which to me brings in all kinds of canon questions about, okay, how did they get it? Where did it come from? Why does it have this ability that we've never heard of before, etc.? Instead of going down that road, what you could have done is you could have done the original storyline, which is that Carol Danvers, as Miss Marvel, got her powers from this explosion, but it was because her DNA got spliced with Kree. Not that, this engine blew up, she absorbed the Tesseract. And this is the other thing, too. Okay, so we're talking about Tesseract energy. Last time Tesseract energy was used, it vaporized people. It destroyed people. And yet somehow she is a human person and can just absorb the energy and become super powered from it. It doesn't make any damn sense. What makes, and I know people say, with superheroes, how is it going to make sense? I'm sorry, but I would buy a hell of a lot more into something that's already been pre-established as destroying people, not making sense, versus, okay, instead, how about when we have the two getting spliced together genetically, and that's what causes her to have powers, instead of them having to give her a freaking blood transfusion just to make it look like she's half Kree. Like
that brings us back to the lazy storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the sense that this movie very rarely sets anything up properly. Like, at least with the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, in the sequel they explained how Peter Quill could hold that Infinity Stone without being vaporized instantly, because he's the son of this, godlike, figure. They did none of that with Captain Marvel to explain how she was able to absorb the Tesseract energy.
You wonder where this laziness comes from. Like, is it just, now Disney owns everything, we're just going to push them through and push them through and push them through. It's sort of the care to detail. If you bring it up, people laugh at you or want to have a go. You like, we see it every day online. If you bring up, the inconsistencies with Star Wars or this, it's like you're too picky or you're looking for problems. But I don't understand where this comes from, like how they get through all the meetings, put all the money involved, and then just don't fix these little problems. Just don't tick the boxes. When I say tick the boxes, for look out for the mistakes and rectify them.
Well, what's interesting is that Marvel Studios has a history of kind of overseeing the writing of these movies and kind of forcing the writers to make changes based off of Kevin Feige's notes or what have you. Probably the best example of this was in Age of Ultron, where they required Joss Whedon to make a bunch of changes based off of kind of what they wanted to do in the future. But in terms of Captain Marvel, the same people who wrote the movie were the people who were the duo that directed it, and it just feels like they weren't used to writing a movie like this, and they weren't familiar with the source material all that much. I know that they based it off of the run of some type of super feminist comic book author who handled the character briefly, but more than that, I feel like there's this mentality that, it's a comic book movie, so we don't have to be careful about this stuff. And yet there are plenty of examples like Winter Soldier, for instance, where the writing in that movie is spot on, like super sharp, really well done. Pretty much anything that the Russo brothers do is kind of similar to that. But you have examples, it's almost like, we're back at the Akiva Goldsman Batman and Robin era of not caring about comic book movies, when it's obvious that if you take the material seriously, you can actually get really good stories out of them. And I think Hollywood just in general, either due to a rushed production schedule or just hiring the wrong people to shepherd these movies through, just kind of encourages this lazy storytelling. I mean, it was very prevalent in Star Wars as well.
I think it comes this thing of indie directors are always going to bring something new, but they just haven't got the experience of, and they've also got so much to prove as well. That's why I think we see all these silly little jokes being put in, whether it's how Solo got his name, Nick Fury's eye, or breaking the story.
It is interesting when you compare someone like Ryan Coogler, who directed Black Panther. And he's a guy, he came from the indie world, even though he had done Creed before he did Black Panther. But he's a very strong storyteller, even though Black Panther had numerous issues with it. I feel overall it was a much stronger movie than something like Captain Marvel. So you do have instances of independent filmmakers who have a good, strong voice that can kind of come in and craft like a pretty decent story.
And I think that's the problem, is that I think that there's been an over-reliance on these indie filmmakers. I think that way too many people now think, if I choose an indie filmmaker, it means it's going to be good just because one person happened to work out that way. And then instead of actually looking at, do they have the capacity to handle this level of a project, they instead try and focus on, who fits the narrative, who fits what we're going to be trying to do. And if you fit that, then all of a sudden that's what we're looking for. We don't care how well you can handle a gigantic MCU world level story, because obviously they didn't care when it came to this because the story was crap, and they care more about those other peripheral things.
So, one of the interesting things I find that Marvel's doing, and Odin, you kind of touched about this earlier in the sense that they're mirroring the path that they're taking with the comics to do more political motivated, stories and messaging. But I actually look at this like, Captain Marvel and Black Panther are both kind of case studies in Marvel trying to expand their audience, in the sense that, leading up to this, they know they have the white male audience kind of in their back pocket. And so instead of continuing to cater to that audience, they're trying to make films that appeal to different audience segments, like women and African Americans and stuff like that. So, there's this kind of mentality out there where Marvel's doing this more of a social justice political messaging, in the sense that, we're appealing to women with feminism, we're appealing to Black people with, Black representation on screen and stuff like that. But there's also this case to be made that they're actually just, they know that, the white males are going to come to whatever movie they put out. And so they're just trying to make new movies to appeal to a different demographic. Do you think that that's the case, or do you think it's more politically motivated?
I think that it's because, again, when you look to these other movies and you look to the stories that they've been able to tell, I think that there's definitely a mixture, because to me, Black Panther was an instance. It was an instance where I started to see the cracks, because it was obvious that the story overall was solid. I gave it a B minus. It was a B level film for me as far as just the overall way it was written. I had issues with the CGI, things like that. And so, but I also saw some political messaging starting to come through, and I was like, okay, this is interesting, because this is the first movie really ever that we've had kind of on the nose remarks. Like, you look to the speech that T'Challa gives at the very end, and he makes a very clear statement that is, I'm sorry, based on the political climate at the time that the film came out, was definitely a reference to 2016 in the United States and to a lot of the big issues with immigration going on. And so I looked to that and I say, okay, that's when the cracks started to come through. And then Captain Marvel, to me, was the first film when they finally said, okay, we dipped the toe in the water and it worked for Black Panther. Now let's try and to put the whole leg in with Captain Marvel. And they're going to look at this and say, oh, look, it's making money. It's going to make $1 billion. And I think that's why you're going to see this next phase. You're going to see a drop off in this phase no matter what, because people are going to leave, because Robert Downey Jr. probably won't be involved anymore. Whatever actors love, what other actors leave, there are going to be people that are going to leave that too. But if they decide that this is the direction they're going to want to go in, where they're going to make more politically motivated stories, or more politically relevant stories, I guess would be another accurate way to say it, trying to connect to things going on currently in the culture, I think that's how they're going to end up losing a lot of people in the process.
What do you think, Robot?
Yeah, I think their whole system's broken. Like, I think money's the main driver, but they do love patting themselves on the back with having the right message or thinking they've got the right message. I don't think they read the audience properly. Like, all they do is annoy people that are reading the way they're selling this film. The general public probably don't care either way. They just go to films that they want to see. And like something like Black Panther, like, I can understand them doing that, to appeal to a different group of people. The problems in that film are nothing like Captain Marvel. It's just like, I think the cast and that's fantastic. I can't work out why some of it looks so terrible, but it's, I think that's, it's a good film. It's not a great film. But in this one, there's just, you can see they've got their message and then they've gone backwards into the story. I think just the whole system's broken. It's just such a massive corporate business now, and that's how it's run. Like, you just know these stories didn't start like Captain Marvel. There wasn't this great story, and then they just had to decide, if it was going to be a man or woman or what color they were going to be. It just, we've started with the character we want, and then we'll back it into a story. And I just think, that whole way's broken. And the worrying thing is, it takes over all the cinema chains. It's everywhere. Little films have trouble getting seen these days. Original stories have trouble getting seen. So I think they'll keep going with this, and I think there'll be a drop off over the next few years, and they'll just start saying it's fatigue and too many superhero films, and it'll just drop away.
What I find really interesting about Captain Marvel and the messaging behind it, like this feminist girl power type message, is when you compare it to a movie like Wonder Woman, for instance, it's very similar in terms of its structure, where it takes place in the past. It has a very static main female character who enters the world of men, where you have these very male dominated institutions that keep trying to kind of keep her down, and she's caught up in this broader conflict that eventually she has to overcome. But one of the interesting things about Wonder Woman was that it was a very pro-woman movie without degrading the importance that men play in things. Like, she actually had a love interest, a cis white man, heaven forbid. She was among a group of other men, of various races and stuff like that. And she earned their respect through, just like the quality of her character. She was an inspiration to these men, and she gave them bravery. And at the end, she's fighting basically this old white British dude, in the form of Mars, the god of war. But it was so much more poignant, I felt, because she just lost this guy that she had this romance with, and there was something at stake there because like the entire movie had been building up to it. I feel like none of these factors were at play with Captain Marvel, where you weren't invested in anything in any of her relationships. It's like her best friend doesn't show up till halfway through the movie, and even then, there's no chemistry there. There's no love interest. The first half of the movie has one set of villains, and the second half has another set, and you're not sure who to root for. And I mean, like, there was just so much stuff that Wonder Woman seemed to do right, where Captain Marvel just didn't seem to care about it. Do you guys?
And do you want to know what the big difference was? The big difference was that they knew how to tell a story in Wonder Woman. They took their time with it. They crafted it. They didn't use lazy writing. They understood that we can guess what we can do, guys. We can tell a good story, and we don't have to get caught up in the minutia and all those small details of, oh, but she can't have a love interest because we can't do that now, or oh, she has to say this way, or oh, she can't be helped by anybody. Oh, she has to only have strong female. Because seriously, like, if you looked at some of the interviews, they made it a point. Even Kevin Feige, he said that they wanted to make it sure that that Captain Marvel was affected by female characters in her life. That was the agenda that they wanted. So even take out everything else. They wanted this to be some kind of modern feminine story that only focused on these really unimportant things, by also at the same time sacrificing any story whatsoever. So Wonder Woman, the reason why it worked, the reason why it succeeded, was because they didn't care about that. They said, hey, we've got a kick-ass character here. We've got a great story. Let's tell it. She has got a love interest. Okay, perfectly fine. Had she not had a love interest, guess what? It probably would have been perfectly fine, because at the end of the day, they had people who understood what they were trying to write. Instead of them trying to say, here's our agenda, how do we fit around it? It was, here's our character, how do we build a world around that character? There's two different ways to do that.
About Captain Marvel's love interest being another woman.
Oh my gosh. Let's not even... the Valkyrie storyline, yeah.
That's where it's hard to pick out the one thing that they could do differently to fix it, because you look at Wonder Woman and they did it all right, and then you look at this film and they did it all wrong. Bad casting, boring story. The visuals were just uninspiring. It was lazy and all over the place. And then Wonder Woman was a proper story. It was fun. What films are meant to be. And you're meant to have a good time.
And just one thing,
to look good.
Just one thing's not going to fix it. And that's why, like, people say, oh, are you saying that if she had a love interest to be fixed? It's like, no. What we're saying is that you could have had on one side with Wonder Woman certain parts picked out, and it still would have been fine. When you look at Captain Marvel, if you had added in every single thing that we had just talked about that was good in Wonder Woman, it still would have sucked, because it wouldn't have had the story to back it up.
I don't think it's too much to ask that the audience be given characters and relationships that we actually care about.
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't care about any of the characters or relationships in Captain Marvel, whereas in Wonder Woman, I did. And I think that that's one of the core tenets of really good writing, is that you actually care about the characters and what happens to them. So just to wrap things up real quick, I want to talk about one last thing, which is Nick Fury, the character of Nick Fury, and the relationship with Captain Marvel.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Goose the Cat. Man, I'm so upset.
We can talk about Goose the Cat as well. But the primary thing here that I find interesting is that Brie Larson and Sam Jackson are actually friends in real life. Mm-hmm. And so every time they're on screen together, I felt like those were the moments when the movie worked best. When they were kind of interacting. And it's funny because, like, if you watch Kong Skull Island, they have very little interaction in that movie, but they're on screen together. But the press tour for that movie, when you see them interacting with one another and doing these like interviews and stuff, like, you can kind of sense that there's like some chemistry there. And I felt like that chemistry was on good display here on the Captain Marvel side of things. And Brie Larson is actually directing, this series on Netflix called the Unicorn Store, and that has Sam Jackson in it as well. And so you've got this one actor who's very good, Sam Jackson, who kind of outshines Brie Larson in pretty much every scene they're in. But at the same time, they have, I feel like, a good rapport with one another, and that's really kind of what carried the movie for me for the most part, was just their interactions with one another. What did you guys think of that duo? Do you think it was strong enough to carry the movie, or would you like to have seen a slightly different dynamic? Robot, let's start with you.
Well, I think you could put anyone next to Samuel Jackson, and the scene would be interesting and entertaining. Like, he's just got such a presence that, yeah, I didn't really get the sense that they just worked great together. I thought they made him too sort of silly about it all for how he is in the other films. That just lost me a bit too. But, like, you know, he's a great actor. You can hold a scene. You can put him like with the cat, and he can still hold a scene. So yeah, I didn't really think they were great together. But yeah, I didn't. Again, because I had problems with it the whole way through the film. There was no bit.
I did feel like Nick Fury's character was very inconsistent from what we saw before, because Nick Fury as a character has always been someone who came off as like he knows everything. He plans for every contingency. He's very manipulative and he's hardcore, and you know, he does bad things for good reasons. And I think that's always been the kind of thing that made his character so intriguing, especially in a movie like Winter Soldier. And then you compare that Winter Soldier character to the character he was in Captain Marvel, where he's kind of weak and he's kind of wishy-washy and stuff like that. And he doesn't seem like that badass that we all know and love. Odin, do you think that was intentional to try to, you know, make Captain Marvel seem like a better character, or do you just feel it was another example of bad writing?
Absolutely, it was intentional. I think it was. I think that what they wanted to do, and I know I'm not the first person to say this, but I think what they wanted to do is they wanted to take one of the biggest guys, the biggest male characters in the entire MCU in Nick Fury, and they wanted to emasculate him to try and prop her up. They used him as a prop to try and make her look better. Absolutely, they used him as a prop. And you can see that in every single scene that they're in by the fact that Nick Fury, the person that's supposed to be a member of S.H.I.E.L.D., has no idea about aliens or has very little understanding of any of this. He is constantly playing in this movie just the dumb man. And
if they had faith in their own character of Captain Marvel, she would have looked way stronger dealing with him as he normally is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And still not caring about what he says and not being scared of him.
But instead, what they have to do is dumb him down and make him oh, look, it's a cat. Oh my God, look at this cat. They have to turn him into that kind of a character just to make her look better. And that hurts her completely and also hurts Nick Fury. And so all they end up doing is hurting pre-established characters, pre-established character arcs, storylines, canon, and all for what? For a mediocre at best C- movie. Congratulations.
And now what's happened in between to turn him around so much? Like, do we need another film now back there to find out?
Yeah.
Well, you know, what's funny is, you know, if you look at Winter Soldier, the scene where the assassination attempt on Fury, where he's kind of ambushed and he has to fight his way out of stuff, like that type of scene was very illustrative of how resourceful his character is. And then you compare that to where he's being ambushed by the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and the Skrull agents in that facility in Captain Marvel. And it's like night and day, where he's like almost completely helpless and he needs Captain Marvel to save him, as opposed to Winter Soldier, where he was just like, he was by himself and he just kicked all types of ass against much worse odds.
Again, it was a gender swap, but this one was of tropes. So this one, instead of it just being two strong people, what they wanted to do was say, we now have a chance to have a strong female and a helpless male character. And as I said before, it's lazy writing at a lot of the parts, but there are other parts that just seem way too on the nose to me and seem a lot more like it was done intentionally.
And bring in another character if you want that sort of bumbling fool guy. Like, again, it's just so much easier. No, let's just change him. Doesn't matter if it affects the films or his backstory.
Hell,
it doesn't matter.
Coulson barely did anything in the film. You could have made him a bumbling idiot because we already don't know much about him. I mean, I don't think it would have been good necessarily, but if you're going to have to choose between one or the other, I mean, at least his would make a little bit more sense.
Well, how cool would it have been if Fury lost his eye because the Coulson guy was a Skrull at the beginning?
Oh my God, that would be fantastic.
Like that would have at least been consistent with what he said in Winter Soldier, where he's like, last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye.
Yep.
You know,
but it's a kitty cat. It's the best relationship in the film, and that is, of course, with Goose the Cat, who I am so happy to find out 80% of Goose the Cat was CGI in that movie, which is insane.
It was also so clunky, like when the aliens aliens tentacles came out, which to me felt like a Men in Black film more than a Marvel film. It was just weird. It was odd.
That's true.
He was scared of it. And then all of a sudden he's got it right in his face, talking to it to get that scratch to happen. Again, there was no It was just so clunky, you
And
know,
when the
to make
scratch
it work.
did happen, it was like he almost didn't, react to it at all. It was
Yeah, he
kind of
just
like,
lost his
"Ow."
eye, and he's like, "Ah, damn." And it's like, okay, so his eye got infected from a cat scratch. Okay, y'all. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Good job, writers.
But even later on, like there's so many more scars like around the eye. It's like, how did
Yeah.
you get those?
I was looking at an image most of that time because I had an article up, and literally the scars go like almost all around his like like an entire quarter of his face. Up, all a cat scratch and an infection.
And
All right.
does the cat, does it think like a cat, even though it's an alien? Like the way it's scratched, like cats get annoyed if you hassle them too
Comics
much.
is actually a very intelligent creature.
So yeah, why did it scratch him across the face after all that? It just, again, I thought we'd established this was a creature, but then it just acts like a cat again. Very strange.
Yeah. All right. Real quick to wrap things up, I want to ask both of you, where do you see the Marvel Cinematic Universe going under the leadership of Captain Marvel? Robot, let's start with you.
Oh, I don't have big faith in it. I think the charisma of the actor put in place is so important to these films. All our favorite characters, you know, the actors bring so much to it that I can't see them turning it around for her. Obviously, it's making lots of money, so I don't know how much that'll affect them. But yeah, I will completely lose interest in it. So Endgame could be the end for me, having any interest. So yeah, I don't have a lot of faith, and I'll sort of be interested to see what they do, but I don't think I'll be following along.
What about you, Odin?
I again totally agree. I know that there are many people who have said, even before Captain Marvel, that Endgame would probably be the end for them because when you think about it, this is 11 years, 22 films. This is unheard of when it comes to movies. Like television, it makes sense, but for movies, this is just essentially unheard of. And so you're going to have that drop off. And if the future that you have is a character that has just been given a terribly written origin story that most people, even when they defended the film, can't even defend as a character, and that's the future going to go in, I say this goes one more phase. I think that we get phase 4, and phase 4, if it goes phase woke like I think that once you get to that point, you're going to start to see some major drop-offs and the potential end of the MCU altogether.
It could be like the James Bond thing where you have your peaks and then it gets worse and worse and worse and drops off. Then they sort of reboot it again and it starts off good. And, you know, they might have to do something like that. Trying to continue it on could be the mistake.
Yeah, I think it also depends. And just one more thing, I would say it also depends on two things: what they do with the Fantastic Four and what they do with the X-Men, because what they do with those two properties, I think, will determine whether or not the slump that they are going to see is going to be substantial or if it's going to be kind of, more controlled.
Well, I think they've definitely set the stage for something like a Galactus story arc or a Doctor Doom story arc or a Skrull War story arc that will bring a new set of Avengers together after, whether Robert Downey Jr. kind of retires or Captain America gets killed or whatever. Eventually, you're going to have a new set of heroes kind of coalesce around Captain Marvel as she leads them against, I think, a more cosmic threat. And they've set the groundwork for Secret Invasion, but they, now that they have X-Men and Fantastic Four back, they could probably go in an entirely different direction. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out tonight and engaging with me in movie geekery. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your insights. You're both very good critics. You know how to pick apart a movie very well. And where can everyone find out more about your stuff? Odin?
So you can find me at the Odin's Movie Blog channel, which is on YouTube, youtube.com/Odin's Movie Blog, all one word. Also on ombReviews.home.blog. Yes, I know it's a mouthful and I'm working on it, but that's it for me.
Robot, where can they find out more about you?
Just my Robot Head channel, just Robot Head at YouTube. And come along. I'm trying to get those subscribers up to, I think where am I? Just 97,000. So I want to get to that 100. I want to get that plaque. And then I can just retire and that'll do.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Everyone out there, thanks for watching and listening. And this is Matthew Kadish. I will catch you all next time.